I think like the culture of ska and punk, especially like in the underground, is pretty like anti-establishment. When you start mixing a Christian message with that, you could see why this isn't the wrong audience for that.
This is Rock That Doesn't Roll, the story of Christian music. I'm Andrew Gill, a music journalist who grew up listening to Christian rock.
And I'm Leah Payne, author of God Gave Rock and Roll to You, A History of Contemporary Christian Music.
And today on the show, we are going back to one of those genres that just has such a special place. And then it has a special place in all music lovers' hearts. But then when you add Christian in front of it, it just gets even more special.
Yeah.
And that's, the one and only Christian ska. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. We have a lot of Five Iron Frenzy fan listeners who
members of Five Iron Frenzy who are fans of ours as well.
Yeah, you asked for it, you got it. We delivered.
Yes. And we've had a couple of episodes, one with Leonore from Five Iron, one with Jordan Morris. But really the guy that you want to talk to when you're going to talk about anything ska is our guest today, Aaron Carnes. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Welcome.
The author of In Defense of Ska, the book, and host of the podcast by the same name. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. And Leonore and Jordan are both quoted in my book. So I got them all covered.
Okay.
Fantastic. Yes.
Oh, then you talk to all the good people, all the best people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I noticed about a year ago on the In Defense of Ska podcast, you had an episode on Christian ska, and you had Jordan on, and then you also had Kevin Porter from Good Christian Fun on, who has also been on our show. Not talking about ska, talking about DC talk, but regardless, it's all good company we're keeping. So
yeah.
I think
that was actually one of our funniest episodes because those two just got on a roll with each other, and we kind of discussed the idea about looking back at some of the stuff is like what's the moral line of what you support and all this and that, and they just went on a roll of like trying to outdo each other in terms of the most problematic artists they've ever supported and continue to listen to.
Yeah. So I remember when we first launched, I had been in touch with you anyways because you had sent me your book, In Defense of Ska, and I at that time I had no idea that you had a connection to the Christian music world, but you shared that you did have some experience growing up. So maybe we could start there talking about how you were exposed to Christian music and perhaps that led you down the path towards ska.
Well, actually, okay, I'll go into my Christian history. My ska history is separate, which is interesting because most of my Christian ska knowledge comes after the fact. But I did grow up in a very, very Christian home, and I wasn't allowed to listen to non-Christian music when I was young and kind of early teenager. So, I went to Christian camp. I saw, it was Hume Lake. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone outside of this area, but Hume Lake Christian Camp is where I went to like several years in a row, and they had like Christian musicians there. There was my church went to Great America in Santa Clara, the Christian Music Day. I saw many acts there, and I've went to many Christian shows as well. I've seen DC Talk Live. I've seen Michael W. Smith. I'm trying to think of who else, the other big names I've seen. But yeah, I'm really familiar with Christian music from the 80s and early 90s because that was the only music I was allowed to listen to. And then I started kind of testing my way out of it. I'd listen to, kind of safe music that wasn't Christian, like, oldies or whatever. And then I was just kind of like, I got into alternative music, and occasionally my mom would like go through my CDs and be like, you can't listen to this, and throw it away. But, the more I kind of worked my way out, the more she kind of gave up trying to control my music. But I discovered ska not through Christian ska. I kind of was getting into ska before Christian ska was really like a big thing. So by the time I was all in on ska and I was totally out of Christian music, I kind of saw Christian ska as being this sort of cheap knockoff.
Sure. So you took the off ramp from the Christian only music, and then as a music lover discovered ska, And then, it wasn't through any of these bands, OC Supertones or
No.
Five Iron Frenzy that
However,
our
I will
listeners
say,
are familiar with.
about Five Iron Frenzy, I was familiar with them, and I did see them because they played, like for me, where I saw them was Ska Against Racism tour. So
Yeah.
they did these shows, they did these shows that played with the same ska bands I liked. So I definitely saw them and I appreciated them, and I thought they were a good band. I only knew the Supertones and Insiders and these bands from kind of hearing about them and hearing their CDs. I never saw them live, but I learned a lot about these bands working on the second edition of my book. See, I did my book originally in 2021 in defense of ska. I didn't have any Christian ska in the first edition. The second edition I released last October. There was certain things that I felt like I wanted to get into for the second edition, and Christian ska, specifically Five Iron Frenzy, was one of them because we had Leonore on the podcast, kind of an early episode, and I even though I knew the band and I'd seen them live, I didn't know too much of their story, and I felt very taken by their story and kind of her perspective, and so they got me more and more interested in the band. And then Until This Shakes Apart came out, and I absolutely just completely fell in love with that record.
They're at the fences, they're at the border. Your brand new gospel, they're not a minute quarter. You want a blockade, you'll draw your swords. God save your sovereignty from syndicated crime lords. Completely righteous, save a little centering. God bless you, this way we lies and gerrymandering. This evolution will not be televised unless etiquette suddenly be advertised.
Which kind of let me really kind of open my mind a little bit to their discography and kind of, I understood that they sort of straddled these two worlds of like the Christian world and the non-Christian world, and sort of how their politics maybe were challenging some of the Christian establishment. But I don't think I understood to the extent that that was true until I began this process of really listening to their music and not just talking to Leonore, but getting to know other people, other band members, and then other people who grew up Christian being really into this music, and whether they've landed on a sort of progressive Christian faith or lost their faith, just sort of the place that had on them.
Yeah.
So I want to get into that more because I love there have been so many people who've said something to the effect of I was radicalized by Five Iron Frenzy. So to your point about they were like very transgressive politically from their earliest albums. So I want to get into that, but I wonder if you could. Most of the people who listen to this podcast will know about ska and why it might be in need of a defense, as your book title suggests. But just in case people are not familiar with like why what Andrew says is really true, that Christian ska puts two like market niche things together that are in like maybe it's like doubly in need of defense, by that time. So could you talk a little bit about ska? Maybe, I would love to hear how you came to it, but why it is this musical form that could use a critically acclaimed book defending it.
So I came to ska in the early 90s, like as I was getting into alternative music. I started listening to the San Francisco station Live 105. This was a little before alternative music went mainstream, which was really like Nirvana. That's what really changed the landscape. But before that, you would listen to whatever alternative rock station was in your area, and if you weren't plugged into that, you'd just be hearing music you've never heard before and band names you'd never heard, and they're all like weird names. Like I remember they were like Midnight Oil. I was like, Midnight Oil. Yeah. And of course, I end up loving that.
Speaking of
band.
Christian bands,
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. I know what that's a reference.
So, anyways, that led to me kind of taking an interest in this idea that there was music happening at the club level that was not happening sort of outside of the club level for the most part. And I got into in the Bay Area, like Primus was coming up, Mr. Bungle. There was these bands that were coming up that weren't really outside of that scene yet, but that's where ska existed as well. And somebody told me about this band called Skank and Pickle that were from the Bay Area, and I went and saw them play, and I just totally fell in love with them. That was the show where not only did I fall in love with them, but that's where I understood that this music I'm watching here is ska. I mean, I'd already heard Fishbone and Mr. Bungle has ska sections, but I didn't know what that was necessarily, not until Skank and Pickle.
And it's a buzz. And it's a buzz again. So what you is a buzz? I don't know. Were you up last night? I was up late last night. Were you watching TV? I was watching TV. Now I cannot tell you. Panasonic. Your son has no excuse. For what? For missing our bus. And it's a buzz again. And it's a buzz. And it's a buzz again.
And then I just totally was all in on the music and trying to see as much of it as I could live and buying all the CDs. And it existed primarily in an underground setting at that point, because we're talking like at this point maybe like 93 or so, 92. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, 92 I think was when I saw Skank and Pickle. So we're not. This is a couple of years before there's any ska on the radio in any kind of significant way.
Yeah, but still fully third wave ska, right?
Yeah, so to take a more journalistic approach, ska is a music that originated in Jamaica in the late 50s through the early 60s. It then turns into, kind of evolves into rocksteady, which is a slightly different groove. And then that turns into reggae. Early reggae is a little faster, a little bouncier, a little more poppy. Late 70s reggae, or roots reggae, I guess would be the more apt term, is the version of reggae that most people are familiar with. It's slower, it's got a deeper bass, it's a little bit more political, it's a little bit more religious, as in Rastafarianism.
The Bob Marley reggae that people might know.
Yeah, but Bob Marley comes from the ska era. But like Bob Marley, most of the Jamaican musicians sort of moved and evolved with the eras. So a lot of, if they were in the 60s, they were playing ska, and then they played rocksteady. Bob Marley popularized reggae. Well, before Bob Marley, there was the Harder They Come film, which starred Jimmy Cliff. That was maybe got really popular in sort of like the colleges and sort of like the rock audiences, the underground rock audiences. Jimmy Cliff was actually the person that he was sort of marked as the star to make reggae huge, but it didn't happen. It ended up being Bob Marley. Yes. Reggae gets very popular. Ska is kind of old people music. It's previous generation music. But in England in the late 70s, it gets revived by a group of, punks, Jamaican immigrants, mods, a multiracial group. This is two-tone ska, the Specials, Madness, the Selector, English Beat. So this is like, we kind of call it second wave ska or two-tone, but this is like a ska revival. It's ska in the sense that it's taking ska and mixing it with punk intentionally and making a whole new thing out of it.
It happened partially because so many people from Jamaica were able to move to England, right? Like I don't know what the political term for it was, but like that was a major thing, right? Like a huge portion of the Jamaican population was able to immigrate to England.
Well, so there was a lot of immigration from Jamaica to England, but there was a lot of immigration to the U.S. as well from Jamaica. But the difference is that a lot of the Jamaican population that immigrated into the U.S. integrated into the existing American Black culture. Mm-hmm. But in England, that wasn't really there so much. So they immigrated more in a way where they kept their culture intact as an immigrant community. Yeah. So there was like sound systems, and really it was reggae. I mean, at the time, reggae was really big, and there was Jamaican, like second generation, like Jamaican reggae artists, like Steel Pulse is a great example.
There was that great film by Steve McQueen. He did the Lover's Rock, I think it was called. That really just like embodies that era, and puts some real skin and bones on it.
So Jamaican music, reggae, it's a major part of British music and culture. Lover's Rock is a distinctly British subculture, subgenre of reggae. It's like this sort of like poppy kind of romantic version of reggae. It came from England. Mm-hmm. It came from all this. And if you look at all the punk and post-punk bands of the 70s and 80s, a lot of them have like elements of reggae or Jamaican grooves in there, whether it's in a subtle way or in a more overt way. Like the Slits is a great example. Like it's just kind of weird post-punk music, but the drumming is like reggae drumming or influenced by. So that's just all over British music. So two-tone comes out amongst us. So it makes sense. But ska was kind of dead. So they kind of revived ska, modernized it. And so this music becomes top 10 mainstream music in England, but it sort of spreads the rest of the world, not like as underground music, as kind of like, it kind of seeps into like the underground culture around the world, including the US. But it does so in Latin America, the rest of Europe, Japan and stuff. So in the US, you have this music, cool people know about this music, you know, because they read like Enemy and they read British press. They're like, oh yeah, I'm down with the Specials. These bands, these bands toured but broke up so quickly, so the cool people got to see them live. But like American bands started forming, like the Untouchables, Fishbone's an early band, the Toasters, Bim Scala Bim, and so they're building like an American ska scene, and a lot of them are really like emulating two-tone, but Fishbone totally takes it a new direction, and then Operation Ivy like really melds punk with it. And so what you see is by the 90s there's a distinctly American version of ska. It's a lot of it's meshed with punk, not all of it, but ultimately this leads to an American mainstream moment for ska, which happens in like 95 to 97. There's all kinds of ska happening, all kinds of subgenres, but the kind that gets popular, the kind that gets on radio, the kind that represents it to the culture is mixed with ska punk and it's a little sillier and it's a little less political. The reason I wrote my book is because that's the version of ska that people not enmeshed in the scene are aware of. And I like that kind as well. But my book is a reminder of like, hey, even in the 90s, this quote unquote third wave thing, there was bands playing like new versions of traditional ska, like Hepcat. There was very political ska punk bands. There was all kinds of versions of this music, and it was a very vibrant, cool subculture. And it wasn't like just the silly thing happening in Orange County as it sort of got portrayed at. And I feel like because that's sort of how it got portrayed, when it became like, when it was time to move on to the next thing, it gets remembered in pop culture as like, oh, that was that one sort of silly moment where we all wore pork pie hats. And then it was like the same time where we were all swing dancing too. Like, so it gets remembered as like this sort of silly trend when, like, from my perspective, there's this long lineage that extends from the 50s. And, you know, yes, ska kind of goes in and out of popularity, but it's always existing. There's always a version of it. And it's become totally international music. There's huge bands in Latin America and Mexico, and there's huge scenes in Europe, and there's, you know, big bands, like gigantic bands in Japan, and they've all sort of evolved this music in their own way and put their own culture in it. So I see ska as a totally different thing, and I kind of just push back on this idea of it being a silly trend.
Well, which wave brought in the puns? When did that start popping up? Maybe that's part of the problem.
The puns started right away with the very first ska band.
The Scotalites.
The Scotalites. Right? So, I mean, you can't put that on third wave.
I mean, maybe that was the original sin. That's like the thing that kept people from being able to take it as seriously, you know, as, you know, even, like a band like The Clash, you know, may have dabbled in some of the reggae rhythms and stuff, but they never did puns, I don't think, as far as
but I mean, you know, a lot of ska bands didn't also. I think that's like, like whatever thing ska bands do that like people want to make fun of, it's not like, they make it seem like, well, like 90% of them did that. It's like, no, there's all kinds of bands doing all kinds of things. I mean, I just think it's like, it's fun to kind of clown on it, and people in this country are like a little less comfortable with like horn driven bands, whereas like I think other countries you see like it's not a joke that a band has like horns in like Latin America because they're used to that in all kinds of styles of music.
Right.
It doesn't like equal ska to them. It just equals like horns.
Right. Because it was also like saxophones in 80s, you know, pop music in America was very, very big, and then it became kind of cringe, you know.
It became silly.
Like,
It's overly serious. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, ska is the next thing after that had horns. And so people just are like, well, that's an anomaly and a weird thing to point at.
It's the marching band geeks, right?
Yeah. Right. You mentioned how in the late 70s it became kind of very popular. And in England, the hip people were all like dabbling kind of. There was like the Slits had the kind of reggae beats. And yeah, that is a thing that like I've been noticing. There's like, that era of like 77 to 1980 probably. There's a lot of rock bands that have that like one reggae song or something, and often they're white. And it's kind of like today, I imagine they wouldn't make a reggae song because it would seem like appropriation. But there was that window when that music was kind of new to people, and people were like, well, yeah, this is a musical form. Anyone can play it and it's legitimate. So we're going to try it. What do you know about that era and like how it came about and how it went away, I guess,
Well, I think like what was interesting about it was, I don't think most of those bands played it in a way that would have been appropriation, in the sense that they didn't try to sound exactly like a Jamaican artist, so they didn't put on a Jamaican accent. They sort of deliberately did it in a way that made sense within their rock format, which I think is like probably the right way to do it, right? I mean, the way Clash incorporated reggae rhythms and some ska rhythms, it wasn't like you would never mistake it for a Jamaican reggae song, right?
Yeah. And there's like a reggae song on Horses by Patti Smith,
Yeah,
like
I just think it was part, so reggae, like from what I was saying before, I mean, reggae was so immersed within the punk scene in England. Like, I think famously, like Don Letts, who's a DJ, he would DJ these punk shows, and he would play reggae in between. Like, and some of that was because he loved reggae, but some of it was because like in those early days of punk, the punk bands didn't have records yet. So he's trying to think of a music that he could put in between, and he would just play like the coolest, like most hardcore reggae songs he could. And they all loved it. I think they felt there was some kinship. I mean, if you look at the Rock Against Racism movement of that same era, you see a lot of like punk bands and reggae bands and alternative bands all sort of like playing these shows and these festivals, fighting this sort of the racism. Some of that was, I mean, to get into the more of the political stuff happening in England, was the National Front, who were a growing anti-immigrant party, who were famously supported by Eric Clapton, who made some very, very surprisingly horrible, like racist rants, which he doesn't get enough flack for.
Yeah.
But these festivals and these shows were pushing back against that, and this political organization. I mean, even the whole thing about skinheads, Nazi skinheads. I mean, skinheads were a very distinctly British subculture in the late 60s. They were just mostly like white skinhead kids who just loved reggae, and they knew Jamaican they lived near Jamaicans, immigrants, so they just dug the music and the fashion.
Don't call me skinhead. My name is John the Baptist. Don't call me skinhead. My name is John Comfort.
But it wasn't until the 70s and you get into the National Front where they're trying to radicalize like the working class. And so, skinhead becomes some of the skinheads become Nazis because of this National Front and this like radicalization of that working class subculture. So anyways, like reggae, Jamaican music, Jamaican immigrants are all over. They're all like living near each other, especially working class. So I think it just made a lot of sense that it wasn't really appropriation in the sense that it was this far off music that they were trying to like emulate. It was like they were hearing the music from people that they knew down the street,
Yeah, so it was like their milieu, and so why not play it, right?
Yeah.
Rock that doesn't roll.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
All right. Well, listeners, Leah got called away, a parental emergency, but Aaron and I can soldier on. I've seen some reference to a group called Ishmael United. Do you know of this group?
I just read about that last night. No, I'm not familiar with them.
Okay, yeah, not familiar with them. I was familiar with another group called the Israelites. Do you know of them?
Yeah, they were in LA, like trad ska band.
Yeah, yeah. And they were like, I think I may have even seen them play a show in the 90s or something in Florida. But
so they were they were and are continue to be very religious and very Christian. But I think because of the era they came up with and the style of ska they played, they were really more connected to the LA traditional ska scene than the Christian scene. Because there wasn't really a Christian ska scene when they started, and then by the time there was one in the mid to late 90s, they didn't fit in with it. I mean, that was ska punk, and they were very like traditional ska and very connected to the roots of ska, the way a lot of the bands in the LA trad ska scene were like, this is how ska's played, this is what's actual ska, that other stuff is something totally different. I mean, that was kind of the attitude of a lot of those bands, and even though they were very religious, I think they like fell more in line with that thinking, that way of thinking.
Yeah. Who were some of their, like, was there a whole scene that the Israelites were a part of, like a trad ska scene? And were they just sort of like just another band in that group, or yeah? Yeah.
I mean, the biggest trad ska scene in the US then and now was LA.
Okay.
I mean, this is where Hepcat come from. There's another Allentown, Mobtown, the band that eventually becomes the Agrolites, who they formed in like the 2000s as a more of like a late 60s reggae inspired band. Those guys were in the early trad ska revival scene. It was huge. I mean, there was like, it was really big, and like the bands that played and the fans, they were super committed to the look, the subculture, the clothes. And if you didn't play ska this way, you were playing something else. And it actually kind of got a little bit contentious and even violent at times, because it was like, even though they were all called ska, it was like, you're playing ska wrong. The trad ska people, and the other people were like, what's your problem? Why are you being such an elitist?
Yeah, of course. And kind of like the rockabilly scenes as well, like that you can see that happening.
Side note for Christian ska, it doesn't really connect to anything else we're talking about, but
sure.
Jesus is a friend of mine.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine.
From 1981 by the Catholic band Sonseed.
Okay.
They were a legitimate religious band.
Yes.
They played primarily like folk rock and all this stuff. I've gotten to know the bass player and singer, Sal, who's a super, super nice guy. But yeah, that was a one-off ska song that they did. And Sal was listening to the radio one day, and he heard the Selector song on my radio. He had no idea what it was, but he really liked it. And he's like, I need to write a song for the record. He didn't have any songs coming for the record. So he basically sort of copied that song and made Jesus Is a Friend of Mine. Kind of it became like a hit when they played it live. So when they got on this public access show, they played that song. And then, many, many, many years later, it gets on YouTube and becomes a whole thing.
I've had friends before, and I can tell you that he's one who will never leave you flat. Jesus is a friend of mine.
Back to your personal history and connection with Christian music. Growing up in Sacramento,
actually, I grew up in Gilroy.
Oh, okay.
I moved to Sacramento about 12 years ago. I grew up in Gilroy.
Oh, gotcha.
And then I lived in San Jose, like my early adult life.
Okay. But that was a hotbed of like a lot of these earlier, more artistically pure Christian rock bands, mega churches and things all up and down that part of the coast. there was a place called the Warehouse in Sacramento.
When I was like really young, we went to sort of an Episcopalian church, and I can't even remember the name of it. But around the time I was in like maybe junior high or so, my dad didn't go to church with us. My mom did. She was really, really religious. We started going to this church called Church of the Valley, and it was kind of it was the opposite of a mega church. It was like kind of ramshackle a bit. And we didn't even have like a proper building for a while. And there was some guy in San Martin, the nearby town, that owned a restaurant. I think it was called the Flying Lady. And he had an extra building, and he took like, I don't know, he liked us for some reason. I don't know what was really going on, but he basically let us use his church on Sundays for our services. And my experience growing up at Church of the Valley, the era that I grew up in, was like, we were a bit more dogmatic than most of my friends and their churches were. There was like speaking in tongues. There was like, you know, like our youth group was like not really full of fun and games. It was full of like lots of like altar calls and like really harsh, you know, you got to stand up, you know, all this stuff. And there was like going to abortion clinics and protesting, which I kind of weaseled my way out of, and going to like Indian reservations, which I also kind of weaseled my way out of. But there was a lot of that. That's the environment I grew up in. So it was pretty extreme, but I was part of it till I was in my early 20s or so. But I think I was out of it for a while, but I was too scared to leave it. It took a while before I had to like sort of face it and be like, okay, this is contradictory to my belief structure and my worldview.
And so there weren't bands coming out of it. That would be too fun. That would be.
I mean, I don't know like any sort of version of an alternative scene in that area. I wasn't familiar with it, and I know retrospectively there was a lot of it happening in Southern California.
Right.
But I'm not sure in Northern California what was happening. And I hear about talking to people for my book about these like sort of church basement punk shows in Southern California. I didn't see any of that personally.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was happening up here, but like it sounds like it was extremely vibrant down in Southern California, like with the
Orange
hardcore
County
bands,
for sure. Yeah.
ska shows, punk shows, all of that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Florida, and I saw I saw all the big Christian ska bands. OC Supertones played there many times, like outdoor shows at the beach and things like that. And Five Iron Frenzy for sure, multiple times. We had an actual Christian rock venue that was like an old movie theater that was like an all ages place, didn't serve alcohol, and just had, shows 2 or 3 nights a week. And the Insiders I saw once as well. But always either at a church, at that one Christian venue, or outdoor like evangelistic type shows, trying to get curious passersby to come check it out.
So there was actually, and this was slightly later, like maybe late 90s, there was a venue in Campbell, which is a city right next to San Jose. That was like a church, but they had church shows and they had non-church shows. It was called the Chemical Free Zone.
Oh, wow.
And so they would let non-religious bands play, but they clearly had like guidelines they had to follow.
Yeah, still no alcohol.
And you couldn't swear. Like and then oddly, Florida, you brought back a memory. When my band, I was in a band for a while called Flat Planet, ska band, obviously. We did a few like DIY tours, which I did most of the booking. But so it'd be all kinds of stuff, skate parks, basements, whatever I could find.
Yeah.
And in Tampa, we played a place that was like that as well. It was like a church, and I wish I can remember the name. So if anyone listening would know, but maybe they'll recognize it just through the description. I know it was in Tampa, and it was a church, and it was an all non-Christian lineup the night we played, and they were kind of like hippies. Like they were pretty cool. They weren't like the Chemical Free Zone where they were like super like, you can't do this and that. They were very just like, hey, we like accept everyone. And they were like, I don't know. We legitimately liked them and thought they were really cool, and they weren't trying to push anything on us at all.
Yeah.
But I knew it was a church, and I knew that they did do Christian stuff. So I don't know if anyone grew up in that area, if that rings a bell. I'm dying to remember the name of that place.
You didn't ever play a show with Oscar Isaac's Christian ska band in Florida, did you?
We never played because I think his band was from Miami Beach, right?
They were South Florida, I think.
Yeah, we never made it to South Florida. Tampa was as far as we got.
All right, one of our dreams would be to talk to Oscar Isaacs about his Christian ska career, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But let's put it out there to the universe. You know, listeners, anyone has a connection, please hook us up.
Rock that doesn't roll.
Hey, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. We just want to give you an update on our Patreon support. We have been very heartened to see new people signing up almost every week to help bring this podcast to you. And we could not appreciate it more.
Yeah. So for those of you who may or may not know, this is a work of love. This is a project that comes from the heart. And so we rely on funds from dedicated listeners like you all. Thank you so much to the people who've already decided to give. It's actually, I don't know, it warms my heart. I don't know how you feel about it. Andrew, you were raised Methodist. Is your heart strangely warmed by...
Yeah, just call me John Wesley over here. Yeah. No, it is the thing that, is required to make the show. We are still not really paying ourselves a fair wage, but we are offsetting some of the lost potential earning time that we put into this podcast. Yeah. So if you do want the show to continue existing, we do need listeners to support us. And, if that's not financially, you can tell people about us. You could share us on social media, do all other things. But we would love this to be something we can dedicate a lot of time to. But, we have to provide for our families, and we do not each have trust funds. I don't have a trust fund. You don't have a trust fund, do you, Leah?
No,
just checking. Yeah,
sad to say. Yeah.
So, we appreciate all the support.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, there were local bands that around me in Jacksonville that started up Christian ska bands. There was one called Honey Locust that I played a number of shows with. And the funny thing about that is that band, a couple of the members went on to form this big group called Black Kids. That was it was a Pitchfork buzz band for a moment. They got a huge hype cycle from Pitchfork when they had just put 4 songs on MySpace and wound up getting super pumped up, got a huge, big record deal. And then by the time their album came out, Pitchfork was we're done, and gave them a terrible review. And so it was one of those the shortest life cycle of a hip Pitchfork hypes, cycle that you could imagine. But yes, some of those guys used to be in a Christian ska band and played shows with me.
It's funny because there's there's the big 3 Christian bands, right? And there's a few others.
Yeah,
the W's or whatever.
Right. The W's I kind
swing,
of appreciated because they were swing.
Tempter met him in the desert one day. Are you a son of God? Turn stones into wholesome bread and make your hunger stop.
I'd say the worst of the worst was B.O.B, Band of Believers.
Yeah.
That is the bottom of the barrel of all music, I think.
Well, that band was that was if you were to make the argument of any of those bands being bandwagon jumpers, that was the band, right? I mean, they were not really ska fans. They were they came from all these other bands, and they formed this band right off of, piggybacking off of the success of this Christian ska scene.
Yeah.
And they put out this just terrible record that's just really relying heavily on and it's the South Park cartoons.
Yeah, the South
too.
Park imagery.
Yeah.
And just the content of their big single being Mission Trip to Mexico. Like,
Oh, God.
let's just highlight one of the most problematic things that evangelical Christians do.
Yellow Taco Bell may not go over so well, but in Mexico the food is true. You got tacos, enchiladas, and tamales for me, and I got some good news for you. You see, Jesus came to save the earth from sin, and if I may say so, this salvation is totally free. It won't even cost you a peso. Mission trip to Mexico. Mission trip to Mexico.
But just like researching, there's these handful of bands that most people know that if they're interested in this genre, but supposedly, according to some sources, there were upwards of 70 Christian ska bands at one point. And I think this is like some local band formed and played a few shows.
Sure, yeah.
So it was a lot for a little bit.
Yeah, I had one other personal connection to a Christian ska band called Runforyerlife. Did you ever hear them?
No.
They put out a record on Jump Up Records.
Oh, did they really?
Out of Chicago, yeah, in 1999. I looked it up today. And they were all from my college, Wheaton College, and so I saw them. They had a female singer, which was cool. And yeah, I lived with one of the guys who had been in the band later, but they were good. They were good, ska band. They would play the Fireside Bowl and things like that in Chicago as well. So.
But so Five Iron Frenzy is definitely the band that has the best legacy. But at the time, I would say Supertones were by far the biggest band. I mean their second record, the Supertones Strike Back, was a huge hit. I don't know the specific numbers, maybe you do, but I know Five Iron never touched the numbers that record did.
And I've heard the stories from Tooth and Nail Records that they basically saved Tooth and Nail. Like they're the success of the Supertones like catapulted that whole label into another stratosphere.
Well, part of what happened was that MXPX was blowing up, and that's they put all of their eggs in that basket. Mm-hmm. Not terrible thinking, except that band left,
right?
And so they were kind of in this position to be like, well, what do we do now? And so then it became Supertones, became the sort of the focus of Tooth and Nail, and Supertones. I'm sorry, formerly known as Saved.
Yes.
Which,
before the movie starring Mandy Moore.
Yeah, the story is that Brandon Ebel said, "I'll sign you, but you can't be saved. You have to change your name." Which good on him.
Smart, business move.
Although I never got a clear answer as like. It's the Supertones, it's the OC Supertones, it's the Orange County Supertones. Like, I don't know if there's an official name that they prefer to go by, but
right.
There's a lot of names.
Yeah, I wonder if there was if they were trying to head off some kind of legal dispute. Maybe there was some other band that they were worried might take action called the Supertones at some point. I don't know.
But they were very overtly religious. I mean, they made it really clear in their lyrics that they were proselytizing very overtly in their songs, and they always did like at least 5 minutes of God talk in their sets.
Oh yeah, I witnessed that myself. Yeah, it was intense. Yeah,
I interviewed the singer for my second edition, and like we talked about that. He said it was a major, important part of the band's mission was that they always did that. Like they wouldn't play a show and not do that. They always did that, and they mostly played Christian shows, but they did sometimes play with non-Christian bands, and they did not get a good reaction. No. They would often get booed.
Yeah. They were really, there's something about combining the comic book imagery of ska and the bright blasting horns, plus a very strong proselytizing message that just puts the smug meter like off the charts, and it can I think that could just be like oil and vinegar, or like I don't know, it could be like the how do you make a volcano? Like the vinegar and baking soda, I guess, it would just explode kind of.
I think like the culture of ska and punk, especially like in the underground, I like it's a little different when you start talking about bands that are getting on MTV and radio play. It's a little bit more mainstream and more neutered, but the culture of this music outside of that is pretty like anti-establishment, pretty left-leaning. So I think like when you start mixing like a Christian message with that, you could see why this isn't the wrong audience for that, because you're talking about an audience that is like, anti right wing, anti all of these things, right? And they're coming from this DIY left leaning culture, and it's like the church. What are you talking about?
I wonder, since you mentioned that, it reminded me of No Doubt and Gwen Stefani. And,
like what's going on with her these days?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, I've made the joke online that, we should have known all along that there was a, evangelical deep down inside. But have you tracked her career, and like, do you have a take on like what she's doing these days, and like how, I don't know if there were seeds of it early on?
So I actually wasn't familiar with whatever these seeds were. I mean, I was a fan of No Doubt for sure. I saw them play like a couple of years before they blew up, and I was totally blown away. I didn't know who this band was. I just saw them. They were on a bill, totally blown away by them. But I have like, I did take a little bit of an interest, like you're saying, when she started dropping these like suddenly like right-leaning religious takes. Like what's going on? And
I think she's part of that Hallow app, right? The Mark Wahlberg app.
Yeah.
She's like doing ads for Hallow.
But it does sound like, from what I can tell, that she did come from a religious household and family. So it could be one of those things where it was always there, but maybe, once you get to a certain age, it's like, okay, you take it a little bit more serious maybe when you're young and you're kind of loose with it. See, that's the difference, the way I grew up. And I think some of that has to do with the church I grew up in. There was no like, okay, you're this thing, but you don't have to take it that serious. It was like, which I kind of like see people I know that grew up Catholic, and they have this, there's a culture of like, I am culturally Catholic and I tangentially like agree with this stuff, but I don't, the identity is the Catholic, not the belief. The belief I have flexibility on. The way I grew up in this very like, and we called ourselves non-denominational, by the way. I didn't say that.
Right. Yeah.
Non-denominational.
Well, Leah, that sounds like that's the exact type of church that Leah's an expert on. So it's too bad that she's not here right now for this part of the conversation.
The culture was the belief, and the belief was non-negotiable. That's how I internalized it, at least. I'm not sure if everyone that went to church with me felt that way, but that's how I internalized it. It was like, you have to believe these things and in this way.
Yeah.
Or you're not a Christian.
No, and there's so much about authority and submission to authority and all of that sort of thing. But there are traditions within Christianity that don't emphasize that, as much. So, growing up in Orange County as well, like it's a pretty good chance that you had a strong religious family, like Gwen Stefani did. So,
yeah. But, Five Iron, it's interesting listening to them, especially the place they're at now.
Yeah.
Where they have members who practice different versions of Christianity. Some of them are no longer religious. They don't necessarily have a hierarchy or that you have to be part of this specific thing to be in the band, because I think they kind of view themselves more as a family. I don't even know if they would identify themselves as a Christian ska band at this point.
Right.
I think that they've sort of pulled back from that, especially because they've really come to this point of feeling so at odds with the contemporary Christian establishment that they're kind of really like fighting it in a much more head-on, even compared to how they were back in the day.
Yeah. And comparing them to the OC Supertones and the altar calls, I don't remember if back in the day I ever saw Five Iron like offer an altar call. I know that if a kid wanted to talk to them after a show, they would talk to him, but they definitely have songs that go to a worship type song place, especially in their older stuff. And they would do, some of the typical moves of charismatic worship of raising hands and sort of, pointing their faces towards heaven and things like that. But I don't know if they actually, would say, this is my testimony. You need to become a Christian now. And, like you would get from Supertones. But even seeing them, I saw them like a year or two ago, the last time they came through Chicago, 5-Iron, and they still played some of those old songs. And they still seem to feel it pretty strongly, at least many of the band members.
A little bit of like insight. I've interviewed other ska bands that played ska against racism. And one person told me that on that tour, Reese was proselytizing offstage hard.
Oh, really?
Bands.
How did it? And they still are.
They're just like, it's cool. It's cool. It's cool. That's good for you. But it's fine. I'm fine. It was that kind of thing. But not on stage.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, I mean, I guess that's a more, respectable approach, at least someone personally, but. I
mean, I admire him, even though I think he's had a few moments where he's maybe taken up positions that aren't great, but I admire the fact that he's very, very honest, very self-reflective, and he's very sincere. Like, I don't think anyone could ever accuse Reese of being insincere ever.
Yeah, no. And one of the things about 5-Iron is that they kind of incorporate the silliness of ska as a genre with like their own ability to take criticism and improve themselves as people, so they kind of embody the best, they embody the aspects of ska that could be off-putting in some groups, but they, incorporate it into like the depths of who they are as a band, in a way that just kind of works,
like I think a good example, and Leonard told me this, is on the Ska Against Racism tour. They're touring with all these other bands that are non-Christian. Less Than Jake's kind of like the big band on that tour.
Yeah,
and they were Less Than Jake made this whole thing where they would give bands shots, to sort of celebrate. And so when it came time to give shots to 5-Iron Frenzy on stage in front of everyone, they gave him shot glasses filled with milk. And then 5-Iron just thought that was hilarious. And, it was all in good fun on both sides.
Nice.
That's the kind of thing 5-Iron would do.
Yeah, exactly. You can be the weird cousin, but you're still our cousin, Well, nice. Well, I guess I wanted to save a little time to ask you about, because I saw recently that the In Defense of Ska podcast has wrapped up. And I wondered, as a fellow podcaster, how did you know when it was time to wrap up your podcast? And what are you working on next?
Well, for me, I think the main thing is that I'm an author, a writer more than a podcaster, or at least, internally in my head, when I look at my should be priority list, podcasting, even though I enjoy it, and I think we've done great work with In Defense of Ska, like writing is still supposed to be at the top of my list. And I felt like I was having a hard time moving on to my next book project because of the amount of work it took to make In Defense of Ska. And I kind of felt like after releasing the second edition last October and kind of going through the press cycle that I felt like, okay, well, I think I'm ready to work on something different. I've been wanting to write a novel for a while. And I think in order to be able to really give myself the time to do it and the sort of the focus to do it, I need to allow this thing to kind of run its course. There's an open door if I want to come back to it. And I still have my Patreon alive, and I still put up stuff like either like old interviews or like I've done a few new ones. Stuff, but it's
right. And
it's not
recently you put up an old interview with Leah, right?
Yeah, which for my book, But I've done a few new ones, but they're not, the difference is that the kind of research and prep I would do for an interview for In Defense of Ska was vast. I would just go into extreme like research because I wanted it to be I mean, you know how it is. You want it to be really
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
I mean, there's so many podcasts out there. You don't want to just put out something that's half baked.
Right,
Because
right.
why would anyone listen to your podcast when they can choose to listen to like 30 other ones?
Right.
But
Or a million other ones. Yeah.
But I can take up, yeah, exactly. I can take up interest of stuff that, like for instance, I just recorded a thing for my Patreon, which I'm going to be putting up in a few days. There's a festival in Virginia called Supernova Ska Festival, which I highly recommend anyone that's interested in seeing a live ska show. It's in Virginia. And they've been getting the bands from other countries, which is an interest of mine with ska. But this year, as you can imagine, was not an easy year to get international bands. In fact, most of their international bands didn't work out, and they had to replace them. And so, that was all these like changing visa rules from the Trump administration, which they were getting like no clear direction on.
Right.
And so I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to talk to Tim, the founder, and just like what's going on. Like, give me the history of getting international bands and the visa process and what's changed this year with the Trump administration. So we had like a 40-minute conversation for the Patreon about that. Like that's, nice. I don't know that I would put that as a normal episode anyways, but
sure. Yeah.
To me, it's very interesting, and it's not like I had to like do heavy research in advance for it. So
yeah. Nice. I mean, it's good to have, it's crazy how media is getting so fragmented now, but it's, if people have learned that if they want to know something about ska, they can come to you.
They can come to me.
And that's
just give me a call.
An important thing to get out there. So, we're the next thing we'll watch the Patreon, and we will look for a novel from you at some point in the future.
I just finished the first draft of it.
Oh, very good. Nice.
About a week ago. It's called Little Black Book of Death. It's
nice.
Totally different. It's just about a man who's dealing with a terminal illness, and he's kind of on this journey to like, he doesn't want to accept it. He wants to find a way out of it. So he's trying to find some cure, and it's all intertwined with music, and he's really into music about death, stuff like, like if you ever listen to like something like Mount Erie's, A Crow, whatever it's called, it's a very, very sad record about his wife dying.
Yeah.
2 records, in fact, stuff like that. Like he's really into that kind of stuff, like just really just gut wrenching death music. And so his head's already consumed with the concept of death. Now he's dealing with it. So that's the
a little less
book.
ska content in that one.
Yeah, very little.
Yeah.
my publisher Clash Books, not ska fans at all. They like my book, and I was I've been like posting about it. They're like, "Oh, we'll read it, we'll check it out, as long as there's no ska in it." And then I was like, "No problem." And then I did make like one little reference to like Fishbone in there, and I'm like, "Oh,
nice."
I'm afraid to report that I did mention ska briefly in this book.
Well, the old prejudice dies hard, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on Rock That Doesn't Roll. Sorry that we had to lose Leah halfway through, but yeah.
All good.
It's been fun. Yeah. Thanks for listening. You can also find us on Substack and Instagram by searching Rock That Doesn't Roll.
And of course, you should give us a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're using to listen right now. Rock That Doesn't Roll is an independent production supported by you, our listeners, and distributed by PRX.
Our original score is by Jim Cooper of Infomercial USA.
I'm Leah Payne, and the show's producer and co-host is the one and only Andrew Gill.
Remember, rock all you want, but watch it if you start to roll. Thanks so much for listening to this entire episode all the way to the end. Give yourself a pat on the back. And if you enjoy the show this much, consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/RTDR. Thanks so much.